brand X, brand Y, brand Z. Not one sticks. Watch it again in slow motion.
Welcome to the Sticky Branding Podcast. In this show, we are unpacking how companies grow sticky brands. My name is Jeremy Miller. I am the founder of Sticky Branding and host of the Sticky Branding Podcast. In today's episode, I'm very excited to introduce you to the CEO of ProjectLine, Derin Hildebrandt. Derin, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate it.
Well, where I always love to start these conversations is not by me telling your story, but reversing and allowing you to give your own elevator pitch. So give me the short and sweet of it. Tell me about ProjectLine. Who is ProjectLine and what do you guys do?
So we are a company that's headquartered in Saskatoon, but we sell all over Canada. And we sell and implement ERP software run a business to small and mid-sized businesses. So in our mission in that whole thing is to transition our customers to ERP with the highest level of empathy, consideration, and fit.
Okay, so that's a lot to unpack there.
Yes.
Why are you leading to the last 3 points? So it's empathy, consideration, and fit. Well, those are the three,
absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, in our industry, if you were to go and, as often business owners do, they go and search, I need something better than accounting. And they start searching for software. You just get hammered with features and functions. Oh, we've got the best inventory. Oh, we've got the best manufacturing. And by far the majority of our competitors talk about product. And what they miss is that ERP is incredibly complex. It's kind of scary. And there's a human side to it. And so we believe there's a human side to ERP, which we embody as a company. But also we recognize with each of our customers that there is a human side. It's going to impact everyone in the business. So it requires empathy. It requires people that understand what they're going through. I need to have people that have lived what they're living, right? They can actually empathize, not just sympathize. Give careful consideration. There's reasons that those businesses are unique. There's reasons that these companies have been successful, and we need to be successful, and we need to protect that, while also showing the best process. And then fit is, if there's not a good fit, we shouldn't be there. This is not a square peg, round hole kind of thing, because you're going to live with the results for decades. So we need to choose carefully.
So a lot of this really speaks to me. Now, just to clarify for our listeners too, is ProjectLine is an ERP implementation firm versus the software manufacturer, correct?
That's right. We sell software by other publishers.
And so which brands do you represent?
The two biggest brands in ERP, SAP and NetSuite.
Got it. Yeah. Now, what I get really intrigued by is I started my career out in the software industry. I worked originally, back in the early 2000s, 21 years ago, I started out in CRMs, and I was a hot potato back then, being the .com years. So yep. I sold the same product for 5 different companies in that period of time. But when I look at what I know of the ERP space and just CRM is such a small piece to what ERP is. It's complex software, as you said. Yeah. And it originally started with accounting and business operations, but now it's that much more. Mm-hmm. So when you look at this empathy and fit and just the human side of it, where's this coming from? Is it because that software is so complex that everybody's needs are that much different?
You know what? There's a lot of common needs in any industry. Every customer says, "Oh, we're unique and special," and yet their processes, if you're a distribution company, could be the same, or if you're a services business, you'll have the same issues and the same challenges. There's always some unique nuggets, to be sure, but really it comes down to customers know that it is complicated. They get easily overwhelmed. They've got a variety of different companies talking about a solution, and they get confused. They're embarrassed by what they don't know. They think they should understand it, right? They feel like they should be an expert in everything. That's the problem with us as business owners, is we often guilt ourselves into thinking that we should understand everything, when the reality is we don't. You understand your business about marketing. That doesn't mean you understand ERP, right? But you might feel that you should. And so, when we look at it, we say that, often selecting ERP and implementing ERP is kind of like laser eye surgery. We all want better eyesight, but what if something goes wrong? We'll be worse off than we were before. And so we're always working to help customers get beyond that. And a lot of this is embodying just trust, understanding that the things we've talked about in our mission, and helping them understand that this is more than accounting. This can completely transform your business, right from the sales organization right through to receiving the cash and service in the follow on with the customer, a complete business process.
But ERP is scary. It can be very expensive. Yeah. It can be very overwhelming. It touches all your business processes. How do you market that? How do you educate customers so that they have that confidence that this is the right decision and it's not going to cost them millions of dollars and not give them the return on investment they expect?
Yeah, well, that's a fair question. I think it's one of the challenges with some of the big brands is that when we work with big brands, often our customers have their own customers that are a large enterprise, and they hear the horror stories, right? There's always horror stories. And the problem is people hear the horror stories, they don't hear the success stories. And so, we work very hard to, have our own set of that. But we can't just tell a story. I mean, we have lots of good stories about what we can tell about our customers. But part of it is helping them wrap their head around how this is going to impact them, what the process is like, showing that we truly understand their business. And that's something that commonly we hear in the sales process. Frankly, even times we don't win the deal, we're like, you guys, you understood our business, and so, but the first thing is to have options. We give our customers options. And that's why we choose these two leading brands. They both have different strengths and weaknesses. There is some overlap between the two, but not as much as people would think. And so when we go to fit, we're looking to make sure that we're choosing the right solution based on what they need. And the second part is putting the right people to that. If I have someone that's worked with services companies, I'm going to put them in front of you as opposed to someone that has, deep distribution or manufacturing experience. So that's another element of it. But I think also when you talk about the cost, you mentioned it can cost millions of dollars. Well, in large enterprise, it does. But our average projects, they're for a first year are in the range of $100,000, $100 to $200,000 for a company that could be anywhere between 5 million and even 20, 30, or even 50 million. So it's a little shocking sometimes to people, but still they look at that capital cost. They have no issue buying a new truck for their fleet. They have no issue buying a piece of equipment for the plant. But they see a number and they can't understand why software and services costs $100,000, $200,000, right? And so the way I often describe it to people is if you look at your annual revenue, your typical first year shouldn't cost on an ERP project, with software and everything, shouldn't cost more than 1% to 2% of your annual revenue. So do the math. You got a $20 million company, you can figure out the math on what that project should be. And the smaller the company is, of course, that percentage is going to go up a bit. But the point of that is if you can't save 1% to 2% by improving efficiency, or if you can't improve revenue by improving your sales by 1% to 2%, then A, you shouldn't do an ERP project, and B, you must have a heck of a business. And I'd love, and you'd probably like to do it too, Jeremy, is do a case study on them. Because 100%. Who can't save? I can tell you that in COVID, and I'm sure we'll get to that, we saved way more than that because we were forced to figure it out. The reality is if we can show someone that we can save them money or reduce leakage, increase their revenue, we can do 1%, 2%. Come on. And we'll pay for the project. Now it's a return on investment.
Yeah. And I think that framing, that practicality is what people need to hear, right? Because this is mission critical software. It starts with accounting and it rolls out from there. Yeah. And what I've seen, and we'll talk about this in a moment with the pandemic, as you said, is what I've seen in the last year and a half is more conversations about ERP because of the shift to e-commerce and direct to consumer. When we look at many organizations that we work with at Sticky Branding, they are all working very hard to evolve and reach new markets and new customers. And the pandemic forced their hand. But they look at their old ERP systems that put together with duct tape and shoestring, and oftentimes they don't have the capability to put inventory to an e-commerce website. And it's bringing their head up to the water to say, what are the capabilities right now?
That's right.
So I'm curious, what has the pandemic's impact been on ProjectLine?
It was an interesting experience, I guess, for everyone. We've been fortunate, but certainly those first couple of weeks last year were pretty scary. We had a strong growth curve we were on. We were just in the midst of celebrating, our 5th year on the Growth 500 list, and in Canada, and things were looking great. We had big plans, and then that hit. And various regions of the country are different. In Ontario, of course, it just closed right down. In the case of Western Canada, they were already hard hit. And so, we have customers across a variety of industries. I had customers that went from 40 people, 50 people down to 2 or 3, and we had others that were figuring how to pivot and so on, but it was crazy. And so we had a couple weeks where we were right away doing the stress tests on our P&L, understanding what was going to happen if, some of these projects were put on hold, which many were. And, then within a month or two, some of those started to come back. But initially, we had some sober thought, and we had to really think carefully about, how we're going to protect our team. Could we protect our entire team? When the federal government came along some of their subsidy programs, did we want to participate in that? Because we're not a handout company. And so, we had to kind of balance that. In the end, we did take advantage of some of that. But the bigger thing that happened is we were forced to look at, what do you really need? As you run a business, we're 20 years in business this year, and there's some things you assume you think you need. And you learn what you can really live with, and then what is really bringing you value. And so we certainly tightened up our bottom line. Our top line was pretty flat, frankly, for 2020 compared to the previous year, and we've been on some pretty steady growth. This year we're stretching again, which is good. It's starting to come back. But the bottom line, we actually celebrated our best EBITDA in the history of the company last year, which is ironic because we had to work really tight like everyone else. So we had to make some, you do some things, make some sacrifices for some customers, you put some projects on hold. The reality is our install base, our customers were, responsive. There's things that they needed to, as they adapted and pivoted. There's not everyone, others had to really fight, and I mentioned the one example going to 2 employees. And another example of a customer in Ontario that went 95% of the revenue disappeared. They were providing food products to the restaurant business. Well, they pivoted and went to e-commerce, and so then we had an e-commerce project, right? So we were fortunate, but it's been quite a ride. Yeah.
What was going through your mind, or what did you tell and communicate to your staff when you were going through the throes of all of this? How did you get them on board to deal with it? Because the uncertainty and the fear was palpable.
Yeah. And there's a lot of, maybe not sleepless nights, but short nights when you're thinking about what are you going to do, and some of the measures we thought we'd have to take. We of course, like everyone, we had to do everyone go home, work from home first, and we're going to figure this out. And we were, trying to keep it positive while we were digging hard and figuring it out. But I think it was within a week or two, probably within that first 2 weeks, we did an all hands call. And it was weird because we're used to doing all hands calls where there's a few people joined remotely from other offices, but we had everybody in the office at our headquarters, and we're doing this massive Zoom call. And that was just, communicating that way is different. But we pulled it together and just had a frank conversation where it was looking. Of course, we didn't give them every gory detail, assured them we're going to figure it out. But at that point, we had some asks with some people. Some people we had to move to, reduced hours. Some people we had to make sure they took some vacation and get creative in that. The interesting is people pulled together. We were fortunate to have a very tight team with very low turnover. And there was people offering stuff up. Well, I can do this. I can take some time off, or I'm willing to reduce, putting people in the hands. I'm willing to reduce my hours for a few months, or I'm willing to not take commission and defer my commission until another time. So that was really cool, and I think we knew we had a great team, but that affirmed it for us. And the fortunate thing is, within 2 weeks after that, we had the things like the wage subsidy that helped us through for a month or two until things came back. Yeah.
Got it. Isn't that remarkable, just how people participated? You really got to see where your team was and all that investment that goes into them, that they were willing to invest back. I think that's truly remarkable. When you look back, so we're recording this in July of 2021. Yeah. We're a year and a half out of this now. What did your team accomplish? What are you most proud of from that moment in time?
Well, we we didn't shrink. We didn't end up having to remove anyone from due to COVID. Like from a cost cutting measure. We didn't actually have any COVID cases, which is amazing.
Awesome.
But at least that I know of, right? But I'm pretty certain we didn't. But I think what am I most proud of? Well, first off, the team here. I mean, like you said, everyone pulled together. I'm still floored by whether people are stepping up and offering things up, right? And realize that every little bit helps. And we kept the company not just together, but we came out of it and grew. And at the end of it, we were still in the middle of it in November. And we were through this whole time. I was evaluating new solutions, and in November we entered this whole new NetSuite practice that we started. We were selling SAP, and we just started NetSuite. And we did that evolution, came out of COVID, this year. I'm saying out of, because for me, 2021 was a fresh new leaf,
Right.
starting a new line of business. And had we not finished that last year strong, I don't believe we could have done that.
And did COVID accelerate that?
Yeah. It slowed down our sales, of course, because, we have customers that are struggling and people are worried, right? But at the same time, it actually accelerated because we were forced to take a really, really hard look at our P&L and what do we really need? What are we really getting value from, on every line item? We didn't have travel. That was huge.
That's a huge
next
one.
to payroll, that's our second biggest expense item, right? So that certainly helped, for a period of time. But it accelerated because it just changed our thinking completely, right? We had just gone through, kind of looking at this new brand a year before, and all of a sudden we're like, okay, how do we protect this and remain true to our brand and come through this the other end strong? And we did it and kept our team together.
Which is remarkable. And we've been pushed through that, but as you said, you've done that with everybody. So I think that's a testament to everybody. I'm curious though, on the customer side of things, as I mentioned earlier, I've seen this spike in e-commerce demand like never before. You'll just look at Shopify's stock. It's on fire. Yeah. It's been on fire every single month for the last little while. Right. Where do you see the ERP space growing and evolving from this now? Where are you taking it?
Because of COVID?
Because of COVID, or just because it's 2021 and we're in a brave new world now? Where are the great? I'm asking a different way. Where are the green shoots of opportunity?
Yeah, well, I think there's been a mind shift, in Canada. I think because in the ERP world, and I would talk with my counterparts in the US, and they've been selling and pushing cloud ERP for years. And while we certainly had the option here, it's amazing how many companies want to stay on premise or what we call a private cloud. Where they feel they just have more control, right? But the reality is that, the whole work from home thing has changed people's thinking. And it's one thing to work in a spreadsheet at home, right? It's one thing to work, on your email. It's entirely another thing to run an ERP and run a business and look at what's going on the shop floor and what's going on in AR and AP, from home, right? So that changed things, that accelerated along with the e-commerce thing. And there's companies that I never would have thought would have done e-commerce for a variety of reasons that are looking at it. But it's also changed. I think it actually forced the software publishers to reevaluate what they're doing, right? Both NetSuite and SAP have been reporting strong growth. But there's been a big shift, particularly at SAP, that's had more of a blended model. I mean, NetSuite is pure cloud, really. And so they've just been growing. SAP's growth has been shifting dramatically towards cloud, which is really interesting. But I think people are also understanding they can, well, ERP is important as an entire business. They can take package components that they don't have in their business and start implementing what they hadn't before. E-commerce is one example. CRM. Well, my sales guys are working from home now. How do I keep my arms around what they're doing without being a micromanager? How do I understand? I really need to understand what my pipeline is like, because I can maybe understand my work in hand if I'm a services business, but I can't see beyond that. What's coming, right? Mm-hmm. And people starting to now reevaluate that and look at, okay, CRM is not important just because salespeople need it. But because as a management team, I think at our company, I can see the runway, I can see the book of business that's coming, and have a reasonable degree of certainty in that, or trust in that number. So I think it's changed the way people look at an integrated business. And so I think ERP is really just going to keep growing like crazy. I really do.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's it's this hybrid and work from home and distributed workforces where data, communication, and collaboration are so key. And isn't that kind of pull back to your brand, which is the human side of ERP, that how do we connect humans to actually work together?
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
You've been, this is not your first rodeo as a CEO. You've had a long career before this. I'm curious, when you've gone through this experience and even looking over your shoulder, when speaking with other leaders and CEOs, what's the best advice or that nugget that you tend to share to other leaders?
This is always the worst question, Jeremy. But yeah,
I know that's why
you think you have an answer to before, and then you go, huh? Well, you know what? And at the risk of sounding negative, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but assume your worst case, and then multiply it. When you think you've come up with your worst case scenario, when you're looking at your business case, or what you're looking at, your pessimistic plan, your optimistic plan, you'd need to look at the optimistic plan, because that's our job as CEOs, is to push hard and kind of imagine, see the potential, and then push the organization to it, imagine the potential, right? But part of that is you also have to look at realistically, and look at in that worst case, what is the things that can go wrong, right? And I think COVID has certainly taught us this, and there's lots of other things that go on day to day, year by year, that as I look back even on my career, where you couldn't predict those things that impact it. And the point of that is not to be negative. The point is, if you've made that assumption and said, okay, well, here I think is my worst case, so I'm going to downgrade that even further because of what I don't know. I can't predict a pandemic, as an example. Mm-hmm. That forces you then to start looking, okay, what else do I have to do? Because I don't want to plan on that, right? So if my worst case is worse than what I can think of, then I need to look at what are my opportunities. And that forces you as a leader to look at, okay, what are the things we can do with the business? How else am I going to grow? Is it new lines of business? Is it geography? Is it, is it other strategic, initial? What are we doing to grow this place and protect it, right? While keeping the place together. I think it actually forces you to look at what's possible by looking at the worst case too. We like to be positive, right? We like to be positive. We got to kind of get off that sometimes.
I fully agree with what you're saying too, because I believe scenario planning is very powerful. But to frame it in a negative, it actually allows you to be creative, as you said, right, to look at what are alternative revenue streams, right, what are additional markets, where can we play, how can we win, right, and so that's brilliant. I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think we can all put that into our management meetings and strategic planning to be asking, if this happened, what could we do? And the pandemic, I think, gives that lens that we can now go, well, we just went through this. What would we do differently on the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Very cool. That's a really great place for us to pull it together. Derin, thank you so much. So final question, where can people find ProjectLine?
Oh, well, you can find us on the web at projectline.ca. Quick search of ProjectLine on LinkedIn, you'll find us. There is a ProjectLine Services in the US. That's not us, so we're ProjectLine Solutions, but you'll find us. But online at projectline.ca is the easiest way, and you can go from there. Yeah.
And you're up on LinkedIn as well.
Oh, you bet.
I will put some links to the show notes to ProjectLine and your social and yourself. But Derin, thank you so much for coming on today's show. It was fantastic. You have such a great story and insights, and there's so many nuggets I can take away from this. For everybody listening today, thank you for tuning into the Sticky Branding Podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your favorite podcasts. We're available on YouTube, so you can watch these videos. And again, visit us at stickybranding.com for the best ideas, resources, books, services on how to grow your business into a sticky brand.